This is not your usual deregulatory pendulum swing. This is something new. I look to the future with a certain amount of concern, a dash of fear, but I am mostly hoping and confident that people who came to the agency to fulfill its mission, to do their jobs right, and I think that in 1,200 some days of this administration, they'll still be on the back end of that.
Hello, I'm Wayne Pines, and welcome to this bonus episode number 7 of FDA Watch. I want to start out by asking you that if you have not formally subscribed to FDA Watch, please do so. It's free, and by subscribing, you get an email every time we post a new episode. So go to fdawatch.net. You scroll to the bottom of the page, enter your email address, and submit it. And that way you won't miss a single episode. Today we're going to do a bonus episode. We have one guest. Our guest is Paul Kim. Paul is principal of Kendall Square Policy Strategies, where he provides counsel on FDA, life science, and public health policy. I've known Paul for many years. We've worked on a number of issues together. Paul was previously head of the FDA and federal government strategies practice at a leading law firm. He did that for 20 years. Before that, he worked for Senator Edward Kennedy, Congressman Henry Waxman, and Senator David Pryor. He also worked as a policy analyst at FDA. So welcome to FDA Watch, Paul.
Thank you, Wayne. It's lovely to see you again. And I do want to acknowledge that we've been circling in the same ecosystem since the last century. So it's lovely to be here to be able to chat with you about where things are.
Well, it's great to have you here. I just want to jump right into it. As we've discussed, we have a fairly sophisticated audience, so you don't have to talk much about history per se. So I want to focus on the future. What's your perspective on how this will play out at FDA with regard to the current administration? We've seen at least a 20% reduction in FDA staff. We've seen a lot of pronouncements by the new administration, both at the secretarial level and the commissioner level. I want you to look to the future and discuss how this is going to play out in your view.
Yeah, Wayne, that's a great way of framing it, because we all have sort of taken that roller coaster together in the past couple of months. Very tumultuous period. And I think it's really incumbent on the agency leadership, on Commissioner McCary and his team, to really steady the state of the industry, to really give some normalcy back to all the stakeholders who have been on this roller coaster ride. And really start clarifying that, our expectations need to be met. We know the administration has 100 days and they're very ambitious and they have a lot of MAHA stuff to do. But at the same time, the usual business, the regular order of getting new drugs to market, right, and new medical technologies to market, these are things that require more a steady stand at the tiller, right, than revolutionary upsetting of apple carts and, radical transparency. I'm all for transparency, but so long as it doesn't subvert or undermine, right, the regular course of business. So I think, Wayne, that's what I think a lot of people are our appetites are very, very, very great for, looking for this sort of normalcy, if you will. And I think that foreshadows the conversations that'll have to happen about PDUFA 8 and the reauthorizations of the user fees.
It appears as though this administration will support user fee legislation. The next one up is the OTC monograph. Is that the way you see it?
I mean, yes, they're saying the right things. And at that first public meeting for PDUFA, for example, as you know, Wayne, they were talking sort of a normal game, and the meeting was scheduled as we might have expected it in the, past cycles of reauthorization. But the backdrop, as you just referred to at the beginning, the FY26 budget looks for a 20% cut at CDER and CBER on top of the cuts we were just talking about, and, when they talk about recalibrating the user fees, people are hearing two different things. They're hearing sort of a small ball kind of potential agenda. Maybe they do away with orphan drug exceptions and, right, more people pay the fees and that keeps the total fee amount down. Or are they talking about recalibrating, really this sort of deregulatory agenda, trying to shrink the agency, more ambitious stuff that hopefully is not on the script, and as you said, Wayne, it's not on their agenda. So there's hope and there's anxiety, I think, even though they're saying the right things and they've done the right things to date.
Among your clients, are you seeing significant delays in either PDUFA dates or in seeking meetings with staff, or delays in inspections, uh, or things pretty much as they were before?
I think it's somewhere in the middle, Wayne. I think, we haven't seen this sort of catastrophic floor falling out from under everybody's feet. We have seen some delays in meeting requests being fulfilled. We've seen more hybrids versus in persons, so there's, and a little bit in terms of the actual feedback coming in. But I think more than anything, at the top line have been uh, those publicly noticed delays, missing those goals. This question about McCary trying to get a CRL right for the HAE drug that was delayed. These are signals, right? But there's a lot of signal and there's a lot of noise, and I think it's more normal than we might have worried in the second quarter of this year, right? That actually things are a little more normal than were worried were going to happen. So.
And if one of your clients does see a delay, what do you advise them to do?
I mean, it is all about just staying the course, right? This is a bilateral conversation with a scientifically expert review team. These things still obtain, these things still matter. And a lot of administrative procedures are still being observed, right? Although it's harder for the FDA inside, right? Obviously, they are under-resourced now, they're underpowered, and they're having to scramble, right, to meet expectations and performance goals. So I think it is always about staying the course and facilitating and being flexible ourselves, and that's the name of the game, honestly. And sort of, I think also expectations, right, Wayne? Like being apprised and aware of the things that are happening at the agency, that have happened at the agency, and adjusting to that new reality, and sort of accommodating that to the extent that you
We've had a lot of lawyers on our podcast, but we really haven't done a deep dive into the legal issues. When I see you on LinkedIn, you're very often raising legal matters. And let me ask you if you could just summarize, what are the legal issues that you see being raised over the last few months, and where do you see some of those issues headed?
Yeah, and I think the elephant in the room is still, Wayne, notwithstanding the decision in Alliance of Hippocratic Medicine by the Supreme Court, the unanimous rejection of standing by those plaintiffs. The agency's approval and maintenance on market of mifepristone, that remains, I think, this salient touchstone of the judicial respect for the agency's statutory authority. We are going to see this play out increasingly. Commissioner McCary said, notwithstanding what he said in his confirmation hearing, that he's going to undertake a science and safety review of mifepristone, notwithstanding the clinical record. So we're going to see that play out, obviously, Wayne, right? And I think this does speak to this question of what does the agency's approval of a new prescription drug mean? Is it on the market, or is it going to be subject to a lot of calibrations, judicial, political, etc.? And then there are a couple of other cases we can talk about, Wayne. I don't know if we have time today, but there are a couple that have stood out. Obviously, one in West Virginia, GenBio Pro v. Reyes, where this was this question of this conflict of law in a sense between Dobbs, bringing the regulation of abortion back to the states, and FFDCA preempting states' regulation of new drugs, and there was a sort of collision there. So I kind of walked into it, Wayne. I can keep talking about that if you'd like, or we could push to a new topic.
No, I want you to go into some of these legal issues because I think they're important, and I think they will have long-term consequences. Obviously, anything that happens with mifepristone is going to be front-page news above the fold because that's major issue these days and has been raised by this administration. So please continue. What other legal issues do you see? And again, where is all this headed?
Yeah. Well, the short, yeah, the short 30-word or less, if I can do this, GenBio Pro v. Reyes was, West Virginia law under Dobbs that contradicted FDA's labeling, right, and conditions of prescribing for mifepristone. And the question presented in the court case was like, well, we've got a state law under Dobbs on this side regulating abortion and medical abortions, right, using mifepristone. And then we have the FFDCA over here saying that, look, we preempt state regulation of new drugs. And Wayne, this is an issue that you've been dealing with for more than 40 years. So this is not new. But the resolution of the case was, you know what? Dobbs trumps FFDCA's preemption of state regulation. So what does that say? That's the Fourth Circuit, but yeah, I think it is a telling indication of what the judicial climate is for the agency writ large, right? About the agency's authority, not just about abortion, but about its regulation of new drugs. And we're seeing that also tension, as you know, of course, promising pathways, right to try, a lot of pushing the Montana law, people trying to push the envelope as to what is permissible to be prescribed, notwithstanding what FDA says. So I think that is one capsule of law right now that's pushing the boundaries. And then there's that Wolferick decision in Texas. Wayne, I can talk about that for 30 seconds or less if that's.
Go ahead.
Sure. So Wolferick versus VFDA was about tobacco, right? And so the vaping companies post the Supreme Court's decision in SEC v. Jarchese was a decision that said, you know what, SEC, your use of civil monetary penalties in the securities fraud decision, that was fraught constitutionally. That is a problematic proposition. So under the umbrella of Jarchese, the vaping companies went to court, said FDA's use of civil monetary penalties against us under the tobacco authorities, that's not kosher, right? And here, the district court in the Northern District of Texas said, you're right. It is unconstitutional under the Seventh Amendment, which guarantees a right to trial in an Article III court. The agency can't use its own administrative law judges in its own courts to actually impose these kind of punitive penalties. I don't know what other kind of penalties are, but that aren't punitive. But so when the short answer is like, wow, suddenly there's a big question mark about civil monetary penalty authority, specifically in tobacco. But again, let's look across the products regulated by the agency. So again, here, is another sort of cloud, clouds on the horizon, questions to resolve, and we still have to see these things getting appealed and how they're resolved in different circuits, etc. So there's a lot of
stepping out of your role as a lawyer and talking to our audience, many of whom are not lawyers. What does that all add up to? Is it that the courts are taking over more responsibility, that FDA is losing some of its authority from a legal standpoint to do certain things, that the states are regaining some of their some authority? Is that what it adds up to?
I think, Wayne, that's a beautiful encapsulation of it, right? We had this vast federal administrative state, and now we're seeing a shifting. I wouldn't say a tidal shift, but things moving in the other direction towards the states, as you said, towards the courts interpreting statutes under, the Chevron doctrine having exploded now. Now we're living in a new environment, and that is exactly the case. And the agency is going to be challenged and going to be, having to fight multiple fronts, right, in these wars of enforcing the powers it has under the FFDCA. So I think you're right. It is a very challenging time for the agency.
So what should a company do? Just watch?
Well, there are companies that are willing to engage in what I would call entrepreneurial explorations of challenging the agency's authorities. Vanda just did, in a court case just this month in the DC circuit, where they said, you know what, we appealed for a hearing on a CRL that we got. I think it was a jet lag drug, something I could really use at the moment, Wayne. And the circuit court said, no. FDA, you've overstepped here. You can't use some administrative summary judgment to deny this hearing. So I think there's an open door there. So yeah, I think there's bits and pieces, a lot of things the agency is going to have to resolve, have to work harder to assert authorities that maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, Wayne, it would have been like, of course they have the authority. Of course the Parks Doctrine obtains. Of course this is true. A lot of those tried and truths, those assumptions, I think are very much in the wind right now.
I want to shift gears a little bit, talk about some of the other initiatives we've seen, and just get your reaction to it. And I'm just going to jump from topic to topic. Animal testing.
Lightning round.
Yeah, no, it's not. No, I don't mean to make it a lightning round. I just want to, I just want to get your reaction because, as I mentioned in introducing you, you've been watching this for a long time. And in your LinkedIn posts, you always have a very interesting perspective. So I'm just going to ask about things. Animal testing for toxicity.
Yeah, I think the agency could do even more. I mean, I think there are models that need to be validated and accepted and used, and sponsors are willing and eager to do this. Uh, you know, it has to be the case that the agency, and this gets, I think, way to a gross environmental issue, that the agency has less opportunity, time, and resources to partner, to collaborate, to recognize standards, right? To do the neat stuff, right, that they have to do besides doing the PDUFA meetings. And I think there's more that can be done with the preclinical side for non-animal models. And by the way, when you'll remember this, like I think in Fadema in like 1997 or even around that circa period, and the stuff gets fuzzy, I admit, the earlier we go. But there were congressional mandates for pushing the agency to do more, and I'm sure there were appropriations report language on the same score. So this is question of call and response. The calls have been there for many years. The responses have been slow.
How do you react to one of Macari's statements that they want to bring manufacturing of drugs back to the U.S.? There are national security reasons for doing it. There's lots of reasons, financial reasons. But what can the agency, what can FDA really do to achieve that?
That's a great question, Wayne. I think the agency has limited power, limited throw weight to be able to leverage a company's decisions on where they're manufacturing, where they're going to site that production. I mean, it's just, the agency has its job, they can conduct it, but that's not where the leverage is. You're exactly right. And there are all these very compelling reasons why stuff has gone overseas to India, to China, even to Europe, right? Um, and then I think the question here is for essential medicines, the ones that are on the short list of essential medicines that we've got to have stockpiled or otherwise have secure supply of. I mean, are they generics or are they novels? If they're novels, like a lot of it is stateside, right? And I think much more of it in terms of the API or the precursors for generics are abroad. So I think we have to parse that, right? We have to really ask ourselves what is truly essential, what is something that we really want to have here in the U.S. If it's and we talked a little bit about the innovative cell and gene therapies. How much of this do we want to have back here in the U.S.? If only because that expertise, is a force multiplier. It's not just good for that specific product line or platform. It's also good for enabling all this knowledge to reside here in the States for the next generation of therapies.
Again, I want to go down this. I'm not going to call it a lightning round. I want to ask you about cell and gene therapy. Recent controversy about the Sarepta gene therapy that got a lot of publicity. What is the future? You've been dealing with orphan drugs for virtually your entire career, and obviously, gene therapies and cell therapies are going to be orphans. Some of them have an N of one; they only involve one patient. How do you see FDA regulating that? And has there been a change because of the changes that have occurred in the Center for Biologics?
That's an excellent question. We knew what Peter Marks thought along these lines. And I harken back to the New England Journal editorial he and Dr. Woodcock wrote, what was it, maybe 10 years ago, Wayne? I want to, where they laid out for ASOs and other individualized therapy in the N of one, there is a way into the agency. We will work with you. And so when we looked at Dr. Prasad's publications and his YouTube videos before he got to CBER, there was a lot of fear. And he tried to, I think, to damp that down. I think he said some of the right things. But to your point, the Sarepta decision, I think, tells us his death and resurrection, his return, in a in a dramatic fashion. What that tells us is right to try, experimental access, patient interest where there is substantial unmet medical need and no alternatives. This is a line that they should toe. So I think Makary, Prasad, Tidmarsh, they all have gotten the signal, I think, Wayne, right? From the signal come top down, the axe fell and, they pulled him out of the ocean. But that tells us that what is the appetite for promising pathways, right? For changing or lowering the standard for drug approvals, for allowing for right to try volume two. I mean, we just don't know what that will look like, but I think that is the direction that this whole drama points to, right? And Dr. Makary, he has spoken about this plausible mechanism pathway for rare disease. What will that mean? We have yet to see the details, and I think that's exciting, but also concerning.
And I presume that you would urge them to set forth their views on on some of this so that there is clarity in the marketplace.
Absolutely. One of the strange things, Wayne, speaking on that about, how they speak with us as stakeholders and how they communicate with the public. I love the videos. I think it's great. And the press releases are awesome. But they're supplanting notes and comment rules. They're supplanting guidance. This 10-for-1 executive order that President Trump issued in January is dampening down the regular communications, the usual courses of us to give feedback to the agency, and that's not healthy. I'm all for radical transparency on the PR side and press releases, but if I'm getting new program announcements and essentially guidances through press release, that's concerning, because how do I respond as a company or a patient to a press announcement, a press release? I can't. So that's a little bit concerning.
How do you view what's going on with vaccines? We just had a recent podcast on vaccines, and obviously that again is front page news. We know where Secretary Kennedy stands on vaccine safety. How do you view that evolving over the next few months?
Yeah, Wayne. I mean, you have, I think, this long view, of where we were before the 1986 Vaccines Act, the one that set up ACIP, the one that set up the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program and the National Vaccine Program, created the architecture that is now being systematically repudiated. And that's very concerning. And I think what I wonder about is there are two things at the agency specifically that I would keep an eye on. One is, Commissioner McCarry's been creating these ad hoc panels, right? Talc, I think antidepressants and use in pregnant women, fluoride, you name it, in lieu of using the AdComs, the advisory committees. And I think these sort of ad hoc, let's pull together a panel of predetermined experts with predetermined viewpoints. For vaccines, obviously that's going to be extraordinarily concerning if it starts landing on the licensure for these childhood and adult vaccines, right? Whether they're seasonal or not, I think that is a concern as just a process, an administrative process. And then the other thing I think is we've heard rumors, right, Wayne, that there's yet again rumors of CBER possibly being split, right? And is that going to be about taking OVRR in the vaccine office and putting it into a dark alley? Is it about taking the therapeutics, the monoclonals and others that CBER has, and pushing them into CDER, which is already 4 times bigger than CBER? I think when those are also sort of administrative questions and concerns that we have got to watch over the next quarter or before end of year.
Right. A final specific topic I want to ask you about is DTC advertising. There's a new report out that the next MAHA report will urge that there be, I'll use the word clampdown on social media promotion, which obviously is growing very dramatically. That's going to be controversial. There'll be First Amendment issues. Talk a little bit about your views of DTC advertising and its role in our society, and also where you think FDA is headed.
I think you're right, Wayne, that the notion that there's this entitlement to talk about my product in a fair and balanced way, using all the power of major media, that is important, because patients who are not diagnosed, they can learn about a disease or condition. So I think DTC, as annoying as they might be for, say, members of Congress who just want to watch the Super Bowl, right? I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that it's pervasive and ubiquitous, and it's really also confusing sometimes because they just tell you to ask your doctor. But there is a legitimate interest, a commercial interest, and one that is, as you said, protected to some extent by the Constitution. And with the agency, as we were talking earlier, sort of on its heels in terms of judicial understandings of its authority, does the agency really think that they could ban DTC ads at this point? I think that's a pretty clear no. Right? So the question is, what else could they do to try to inhibit that level of DTC dialogue, that advertising between sponsors and the public and patients? Could it be like, the disclosure requirements, Wayne? One thing I was wondering about, like, look, right now they can just say, like, check the labeling, and they give you a sort of a fast FedEx speed disclosure of the major risks. Well, if the agency felt like that was inadequate, they could balance the right to have a DTC ad on air with a more complete disclosure of risks. that would blow up a 30-second spot, I think, right? I mean, I just cannot imagine what that would look like. But you could see how they could put some downward pressure through some clever, right, manipulation of conditions and standards without really testing the constitutional boundaries of what they can do.
Right. The likeliest action that might emerge from this MAHA report, if the press reports are accurate that DTC advertising will be featured in the MAHA report, is to increase the safety disclosure that's needed, not just in DTC television advertising, which generally is not 30 seconds anymore because they can't get all the information in 30 seconds, but particularly in social media, which I think will be the target of the MAHA report, according to the press reports. Social media clearly is a growing area for prescription drug and prescription device promotion, and that seems to be the target of the MAHA report. Again, I'm just quoting news sources because I don't have any direct knowledge of what's going to be in the MAHA report, and it hasn't issued yet. But that's something that we all need to watch. Before we break, I want to ask you this: if you were advising Dr. Tidmarsh, who was the new director of CDER, if you were sitting by his side and you had a private conversation, and he said, "Paul, what do you think I should be doing here at CDER? What are my priorities?" How do you answer that? I'm going to ask you the same thing about Dr. Prasad.
Yeah, I would have to say if you were at the head of that center right now, clearly the most work is really about internally assuring that your teams, right, your leaders, have confidence that you will back their scientific judgment. I would think that would be the most important thing to do. The ceiling has already been set. The death and resurrection of Dr. Prasad tells me there are certain lines I should not cross. But as a manager, and of course, Dr. Tidmarsh, I mean, he created Horizon and La Jolla. He gets this. I think that he is the right man for that job in that regards, right? Because he has managed those large enterprises and understands that what's most important is to meet the PDUFA user fee goals. You have to have high functioning teams, ones whose morale is not crippled by what's transpired in the past year.
What about Dr. Prasad?
Boy,
you said before, that he's been in and out. Now he's back. What is your advice if you were sitting by his side?
Yeah. One thing that really struck me in his communications, in his videos, was, casting himself as a change agent. And, honestly, the way things were at CBER, things were going really well. And by that, I mean rapid licensure, strong engagement with patients, clear understanding of what their statutory flexibilities were, and the willingness to exercise those flexibilities when it came to addressing unmet need. And Wayne, I would say, Dr. Prasad, look to that record. You don't have to be a clone of Dr. Peter Marks, but you can take some lessons from his leadership. As unpopular as he might have been, see what he did well and try to replicate that, because the beneficiaries will not only be yourself and the administration, but everybody in the ecosystem.
Thanks, Paul. We're going to take a short break now. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. And we're back. We're talking with Paul Kim, principal of Kendall Square Policy Strategies. Paul, for the second part of our discussion, I want to ask you about orphan drugs and rare diseases. As both of us know, we've been involved with orphan drugs and rare diseases for a long time. How do you see, the FDA policies with regard to orphans and rare diseases playing out? Is it going to be any different than it would have been if there had been a different administration in charge?
That's a great question, Wayne. I mean, sort of like the what if is an excellent proposition. I would say that what Dr. McCary has said about plausible mechanism has sort of two edges. It's very promising. It sounds very cool. At the same time, we don't know what that means. Will it mean inherent flexibilities or channeling a lot of rare disease drug development towards this new pathway? Like, is it really sort of the one way to get through? And the hub is intact. Amy is in charge of that. Terrific leadership. Hopefully, we'll be able to see them do more in engaging sponsors and patients. But I think that the lost opportunity here is, as you've sort of set the stage here, is one that was true for whoever the administration, whoever the president was, which is taking and seizing this moment of innovation and curing very rare N of one diseases. And you remember from I think it was the June Cell and Gene Therapy Roundtable, Wayne, right? David Liu was there. He posited that we could cure or treat 1,000 very rare disorders, right, using base or prime editing as platforms by 2030. And that's not an unrealistic proposition. But what's missing, isn't new authority for the agency, not right to try or promise. That's not about the law. It's about the money. It's about the coordination and the partnerships, right? The putting together of the pathways that are not legal and regulatory in nature, but more like partnerships, contracting for manufacturing, technical assistance from the agency, right? Funding to do the enabling studies for clinical development. The money's there in the federal government. I heard Dr. Bhattacharya say he's got a lot of money because they withheld all those NIH grants. If you put that money towards very rare N of one, I guarantee you could cure or treat 1,000 rare diseases, very rare diseases by 2030. That's a not unrealistic goal. And I think what's happening is that nobody's put that together. And that's a want of leadership, a want of vision.
Yeah, as you and I have discussed at various meetings, in order for the investment community to invest in rare diseases, they have to have confidence in the FDA. Yep. Do they have the confidence? And if so, well, let me just ask you a question: Do they now have the confidence? How does the investment community and how does the rare disease community view what's going on at FDA?
I think it's like everybody. It has been so tumultuous that the amount of uncertainty, right, the predictability of the agency's decision making has taken a hit, and that makes everybody suffer. And I think you're right. That's a top line pressure on investment, on the willingness to take a risk. Let's just do an app instead. I think that is not healthy, and that's why I think from the get go we were talking earlier. This need for a return to normalcy, to an understanding that there's a steady hand at the tiller. I think that's really crucial. And you can signal that any number of ways. It makes me so concerned, Wayne, that we saw the Secretary of HHS go to the agency and to their faces tell these career employees that they were sock puppets of regulated industry. I mean, you tell me, but in my experience, that has never happened. I hope it never happens again. But that is where we were very recently, and we just have to get away from that. And so I think people inevitably factor this into their decisions.
What do you think about the voucher program? Dr. Makary has really touted that, whereby they will be reviewing in a day or two a lot of data. They'll be using more AI, and I'm going to get to AI again in a second. But what do you think about that proposal?
As an idea, it's very exciting, but as a lawyer, sorry, Wayne, I'm still a recovering lawyer. I don't see the legal basis for this. I do not see the authority in the FFDCA. They claim 501 and 351 of PHS Act give them the authority to do this. I don't think it does. And so that underlying concern, coupled with the fact that one of the criteria for eligibility for this new voucher program, the National Priority Voucher, is pricing concessions. Most favored nation pricing concessions. I mean, you tell me, Wayne, but in my experience, that has never been part of the agency's mission or statutory authority. And so that is a huge reach. I don't know if anyone will challenge it, right? Is somebody going to stand up and try to stop them? But it's extraordinarily problematic for me to see the commissioner tout a new program like this, offering enormous benefits, but on the basis of, I don't know what, good ideas, enthusiasm.
Will it work? Will it work? I mean, is it plausible for FDA to convene in one room all the relevant people who need to review data and spend a day or two discussing the data and reach a decision?
That is an excellent question. We talked a little bit about the lack, sort of the cutting into, there's no fat at the agency. It's about cutting into the muscle. will they be able to do everything they need to do for every priority submission, for every standard submission, and do this, Wayne? That is exactly the right question. I would have to say you would have to have something that was um, pre-made. I mean, this is going to have to be a Duncan Hines. Do you know what I mean? You can't just take this from scratch and take a truly de novo submission for a disease that has no alternative therapy, something that's radically new, and then sort of boom, it's done in a day. I mean, you don't bake cakes that way. So it has to be something where they have a wink and nod understanding that we already know the science here. We can satisfy what we've claimed to be our goal, and they won't accept anybody unless they know that they can satisfy that goal.
How do you interpret what they're saying in terms of whether there will be a higher, a lower, or a different, or the same approval standard for drug and biological products? Are we looking at a shift in that, or are we looking at a continuation of adequate and well-controlled studies, the same standard that FDA has always applied?
Yeah, one or more. I mean, that's a great question, Wayne. I saw less sort of movement in the joints around the substantial evidence of efficacy standard, and more in sort of like the entry points, right? The criteria for eligibility, the MFN pricing thing, which is, as far as I can see, not legal. And then you saw there was a wink and nod towards psychedelics. You saw that a novel therapy could be, I don't know, something for PTSD, which I think was a wink and nod to the secretary's deep enthusiasm for psychedelics. And remember, at his confirmation hearing, he promised an approval within a year of his confirmation. So this would actually fit that bill quite nicely.
And final question, I want to ask you about AI. Every podcast that we do, we're asking about AI because that's been identified by many, many people, and it clearly is going to have a major impact on everything that everybody does. How do you see that impacting the FDA, the use of AI? Dr. Makary has implemented the ELSA system.
Mm-hmm.
AI is known to have deficiencies. They use the word hallucinate. Sometimes AI hallucinates. The only information they can have is what's fed in there. How do you see that being used by the FDA?
Yeah, I am very curious. When the launch took place, I think it was early June, Wayne, when Commissioner Makary said that they're launching ELSA across the agency. And we've heard reports that the staff do not find it particularly helpful, responsive, accurate. Um, Here's the question. They have said, the agency has said that this tool is not taught on the basis of submissions, right? That confidential, commercial, and proprietary information has not entered into the learnings and the teaching of this model and this generative AI. If that's the case and it's being used to evaluate our submissions and it hasn't been taught on the basis of our submissions, Wayne, that is a discontinuity that is concerning to me because right, you're asking the tool to help with a review of stuff that it hasn't been taught about. To me, that's something fundamentally concerning, and the agency hasn't said more about that. That is the first order question I have about what they're trying to do right
Let me give you the opportunity for a summation.
now.
Since you've dealt with some of the legal cases. Again, I'm going to ask you a question again that I asked you at the very beginning. Where is all this headed? Are you optimistic that FDA is going to be able to do the job that it's required to do, which is to protect and advance the public health? Some of the things that Dr. Makary has suggested seem to me not off base in terms of consolidating some of the adverse reaction reports, in terms of expediting product approvals. Where do you see this all headed?
Yeah, this is not your usual deregulatory, pendulum swing. This is something new, and so I look to the future with a certain amount of concern, a dash of fear, like paprika on the top. But I am mostly hoping and confident that the agency consists of many career employees, people who came to the agency to fulfill its mission, to do their jobs right. And I think that, and 1,200 some days of this administration, they'll still be on the back end of that, still doing their job, still fulfilling that statutory mission of getting innovative products to patients and protecting the public health. So I'm confident the agency will remain upright and steaming in the right direction. Granted, the course could be very twisty, but like you, Wayne, I think we've seen a lot of crises over the decades, and I think this is just the latest flavor.
That's a good place to end it. Let me thank Paul Kim for being on the podcast today. Paul, as I expected, you were very engaging, very direct, very knowledgeable. I want to thank our podcast creator and producer, Michael Levin Epstein, our assistant producer, Sam Hoffmeister. I want to remind our listeners that if you want to be a marketing partner or just comment on the show, you can contact us at info@fdawatch.net. That's info@fdawatch.net, and that's our website, fdawatch.net, if you want to listen to previous episodes. Finally, if you're so inclined to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast, it really does make a difference. And as I said at the top of our podcast, if you have not yet subscribed officially, if you're not getting notices by email, then do subscribe, fdawatch.net. It's very simple and it's free. And as we say at the end of every episode of FDA Watch, if you really want to watch what FDA is doing, listen to FDA Watch.